Therapist walked me through my childhood the way it really happened, not the way I perceived it to happen. Unlike that, they tell us that you're only as sick as your darkest secret. Well, I had a secret that I didn't know I had. It was a event that happened with my parents, and that set the tone for me. So by age 12, I found my own coping skill, which was a 32-ounce bottle of beer. By age 14, I was using a needle because I was really at the instant gratification. First time I went to jail was on my prom night. I just had to fill out a background check for state of Texas. You have to list all your criminal stuff, and I listed what I could, and then I did an attachment letter saying, I'm not denying anything else you find, I just don't remember.
Welcome back to the Recovery Couch, where real stories meet real hope. I'm your host, Brandon Couch, and in today's episode, I sit down with John Michael Weber, who opens up about his powerful journey through trauma, addiction, and recovery. John shares how childhood wounds shaped his path. He shares the moment that pushed him to seek help and how honesty and service became the foundation of his healing. This conversation is raw, redemptive, and a reminder that no matter how far you've fallen, hope is still within reach. So take a seat and let's dive into this inspiring story of transformation right after a word from our sponsor. This episode of the Recovery Couch is brought to you by Greg Swartz at Remax Victory and Affiliates. Greg helps families find their way home. This episode is also brought to you by JB Davis at South Dayton Toyota, where integrity and service drive everything they do. I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsors for believing in stories of redemption and recovery. The Recovery Couch is a true story media production. What is up, my podcast guests? I'm so excited for just another beautiful day in fall 2025 here in Ohio, where the sun's shining and we're just living life one day at a time. I am joined by a guest today who we finally are getting on a podcast recording. John Michael Weber and I this is the third time I think that we've tried to do this, and we finally are sitting here able to make it happen. So this gentleman has an incredible journey he's going to share with us on today's podcast, and join me in welcoming John Michael Weber to the show. John, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. So just for the guests out there that might be your first time, I'm your host, Brandon Couch, author of Step 4, A Journey Through Addiction. Go check out the copy. You can get it through my Square link.
Cool.
Or you can buy it wherever you find a book retailer, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, et cetera, et cetera. My friend that's joining us today is also an advocate in the recovery world. And John, why don't you give us a little bit of your background on what you're doing and why you're doing it?
Well, my passion is trauma because my story begins at age 3. But I didn't realize that until I was 42 years old. And because I had no idea, I guess after 30 years of addiction and I had like 5 one-year chips. I'd go through the steps and do that. I'd stay sober for a year and then I'd go right back to being me. In other words, my insides weren't changing. And so at last, at age 42, I asked myself the question, why don't I like just being who I am? Why do I have to anesthetize myself to like being me? And that's when I got into therapy. The therapist walked me through my childhood the way it really happened, not the way I perceived it to happen. Unlike that, they tell us that you're only as sick as your darkest secret. Well, I had a secret that I didn't know I had. It was an event that happened with my parents, and that set the tone for me. And so by age 12, I found my own coping skill, which was a 32-ounce bottle of beer. By age 14, I was using a needle because I was really at the instant gratification. First time I went to jail was on my prom night. I just had to fill out a background check for state of Texas. You have to list all your criminal stuff, and I listed what I could, and then I did an attachment letter saying, I'm not denying anything else you find. I just don't remember it. Anyway, by a family intervention, I got introduced to AA around 1998 because I had one middle brother who uh, had been sober for 5 years, and me and my baby brother were in Houston selling teddy bears to get money to buy dope. I ended up on heroin because I'd done all kinds of drugs, but there was always that one drug I wouldn't do, and that was heroin for me until I did it. And I started losing my fingers. I had just gotten out of the service. I served 4 years in the Air Defense Artillery, spent a year in Korea,
What branch?
Army, and that was the beginning of the end of my marriage too. I had two beautiful kids along the way, but I had on my pinky finger I had just a little cut that wouldn't heal. And back then I was swapping needles, sharing needles and all that and AIDS was hitting it big, and I was scared to death of that. Nobody seemed to could do anything. It was the first time I got called out on my drinking though, because I took a sick day from, it was a Monday, because nobody wants to run 5 miles on a Monday morning at 5 o'clock. So uh, I went in to get my finger looked at because I was getting ready to go to Korea. And when they gave me some solution to keep my hand in, it was shaking so bad I had to hold, the alcohol was wearing off and I had to hold my fingers. And anyway, that's where they quit paying attention to the finger, and the PA called me in and said, I think you got a drinking problem. I said, like any good alcoholic, I said, no, I was watching, I'm a Houston, back then it was the Houston Oilers. I've been a Houston fan all my life, and I blame them for my alcoholism. But anyway, and plus I didn't want to go to treatment because I was fixing to go to Korea, and I'd heard stories about that place. And when I got back, I was just about to be promoted to sergeant, and I got a DUI on post. And that busted me a rank and pretty much ended my military career because by then I was 28 years old, and I didn't see coming back from that. So I got an honorable discharge after Desert Storm. Went back. Drinking never stopped, but my finger kept getting worse and worse. And then it got to the point where my wife finally left me, and my brother's wife left him at the same time in Dallas. And my dad's big idea was to put us in the same house. So he had a HUD home, and we both refer to as the house from hell now, because we were supposed to rebuild it. So he opened an account. My poor father, we had bought a new bathtub unit with a shower and all that 3 times, because we'd buy it, set it down there, we'd run out of money needed for dope, and we'd go return it. Anyway, my finger kept getting worse, and somebody said try heroin. So I did. And once you try it, there's nothing else like it. It takes you to a euphoria that is where the world's okay, everything's okay. And so, like I said, a family intervention got me to Maryland, away from my kids that I was away from anyway. But I kept going in and out of AA. I loved it. I'd show up at all the parties. I'd get a girlfriend when they told me not to. I did everything but, and a lot of times you wrote a book on the fourth step. The fourth step ran me out of the rooms more times than I can imagine, because there's no way I was giving up what I'd done. But then one day I was in West Baltimore, and I'd just done a shot of dope. I don't know. It had to be God's intervention, because I had a girlfriend that I'm still in touch with today. She, out of the goodness of her heart, let me stay at her apartment, paid for a cab to get me there. And in the middle of the night, as God is my witness, I woke up and she was just looking at me, and like I had scars at the time, and she was like running her fingers softly over the scars and everything. And I said, that gave me, somebody does love me, somebody does care. And that gave me the strength to go into the VA the next day and do it. But the funny thing is, she said, that never happened. But to me, it was real. You know, I can visualize it right now, and it seemed real to me. So I believe that was God using her as a vessel to give me the courage to go get right. Went into a place called the Helping Up Mission. To be honest, I was on methadone for 6 months, and but I stayed in that mission. I only got to 75 milligrams of methadone and kept it there, and stepped off of it in 6 months like it was nothing. By then, I was in therapy. I was going to AA meetings. I was working steps for real, and my life changed. I tell you, I've had a lot of paychecks in my lifetime, but I only remember one exact amount, and that was a gnat or something. I got while I was staying at the mission. There was a guy there, and that was watching God work. All these guys coming in, they're homeless in the same boat, helping each other out. And it gave me a different view of God. And I asked my friend, his name was Popeye, and I said, how do I get on selling papers for the Baltimore Sun? He said, and he introduced me to a guy. I had dinner with him that night. It was provided by a church. It was cool. And I said, can you get me into selling newspapers? He asked me, are you going to steal the money? I said, no. He said, be there at 5 in the morning. And I went there, and that day I made $18.75. And that's the only paycheck I remember in my lifetime, but it was the best one I've ever gotten. And then from then, everything just started going the way things should. I stayed in a controlled environment. I went from a mission to a halfway house or a sober home, you could call it now. Then I went to a crisis shelter and stayed there. They had no time frame on it. They handed out medications, watch you take them. I had a counselor. I had a job, and I stayed there about 2 years. Then I felt okay to get my own apartment. And it was just in time for my youngest daughter to come do her senior year of high school with me because her mother was in prison. And these are things you don't hear about. But anyway, basically, that was on November 19th, 2001 is when I got sober. Now, and life has been good. I've learned coping skills that I can get. My daughter got diagnosed with, my oldest daughter got diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. She's still battling that. A year after that, I got diagnosed with liver cancer. And as of this month, I'll have a year cancer free.
Praise
So,
God.
and so I believe that I will never be able to do enough. I think that, and not to get religious, but in the Bible it says, to those who are given much, much is expected. And I don't think I'll ever reach that limit, but I know that I have a purpose. And it kind of changed after I got to the liver. Because recovery now, I think, has got a serious issue in that 30 days doesn't do anything but get everything out of your system. I'm preaching to the choir, staying sober is the trick. And asking yourself, why did I need to do that in the first place? I had plenty of friends that drank when they were in high school and stuff like that, went on to live good lives. And I know this, that trauma used to be in the 70s into the mid 80s. There were only two things that were considered traumatic as far as mental health, and that was rape and combat. And you could have two combat soldiers go to the war, see the same thing. One of them's going to come back and process that and move on with his life. The other one's going to spend the rest of his life on drugs or getting help through mental institutions or whatever.
And that doesn't mean either one of them's right or wrong. Let's make that
Right,
clear.
right.
It doesn't mean the guy who isn't traumatized is a better man or stronger
No,
mentally
no,
or
no, no, not at all. They're just now getting into the research of the genetics. Why did my children, who were raised by two addicts, grow up and be able to process everything they had to watch? Because they're doing fine. But you can get what I know. I got a EDS, which is somewhat of a doctoral degree in traumatology. So it's not me. It's everybody saying the same thing. I think Dr. Gabor Mate said that addiction is nothing more than trying to escape the horror of your childhood. And childhood abuse is the most overlooked crisis we have in the world.
Let's stay on that. Let's not rush through that, because I recently, um, I recently made a comment to somebody. I can't remember this conversation, but what you just said reminds me of the conversation where I was like, when you think about people in active addiction, myself, when I was in active addiction, I'll use myself as an example. I was trying to escape reality. That's how bad reality was for me.
Exactly.
Right. And I think once people have an understanding of that, then it's a little easier for us to love them through the recovery process.
Right.
Right. Because you're talking about the 30 days of just clean time not being enough. Okay. Then we got to go and we got to poke and prod around and find all these traumatic experiences that you don't want to talk about in your step 4. But we got to get to them before you can really heal. And once we poke and prod and start getting to some of these real issues that were the reason that you were coping through substance, that's going to be where it's going to start to get a little tough to love people in recovery, because they're going to get defensive and, get away from, I don't want to talk about it.
Well, and that's the important part is that we're afraid to talk about it. I was afraid to find out that the real me is worse than the me I'm living with. I became comfortable in my misery because
and that's what, so when we get to that point where we're loving someone through recovery and they're starting to get defensive, and most of my life I saw, people just throw their hands up like, I don't know what to do with them. I don't know what to do with, instead of when we learn that their reality was so bad, they perceive their reality as so bad that their best option was drugs, then we can start to have a little bit more empathy when we get to that defensive part of step work where, they're getting defensive and we're typically throwing up our hands and saying, I don't know what to do with it. I can't, I'm trying to help him and he just won't. If we start to understand, like, at some point in time, them off of drugs had their brain was having such a hard time with their reality that the life that seemed better to them was on drugs.
exactly.
When we can understand that, then we can, I think, have a little more empathy, loving somebody through recovery.
Well,
and that's what you're saying.
I'm sorry. The greatest gift ever given to me was that my entire family alienated. They finally realized they couldn't help me. So I ran out of bailouts. And, a large part of my addiction was if I knew somebody was going to bail me out, why am I going to quit? And so when I walked into that mission, I had no one I could call. Nobody.
I still don't, John. I don't have a whole lot of family still to this day.
Now my family's, I've done all my forgiving. I've asked for forgiveness. I had to forgive me first because and maybe you agree, maybe you don't, but when I was coming up and everything was my fault. If I'd have been a better kid, Dad wouldn't be arguing with Mom. If I'd have been a better kid, a big brother, Dad wouldn't be, corporal punishment. I mean, I learned to take a punch really early in life, but everything is your fault. I always go back to that Good Will Hunting scene where if you ask somebody, do you think it's your fault? And they go, no, I don't think so. A lot of them do, but they'll deny it. They'll say, no, it's not my fault. But they don't really believe it. And so, and when when I do therapy with someone, I know this, that they've already got it scripted, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, what they're going to say, how much they're going to give up. And the idea is to throw them off their script before they get a chance to get into it. And
And that's where it becomes a big game of like mental warfare. And then once they find out you're doing that, then hey, then they get defensive on that. Like, oh man,
they
what you're
can.
trying to?
I'm not saying it works on everybody, but each person is an individual. You got to approach them differently. You got to be culturally
Absolutely.
aware. Like I cannot counsel an African American and say I understand because I don't. I don't understand what it's like to grow up in this United States as a Black American or Latino or anything like that. So I can't empathize, but I can sympathize. And the common denominator is we both know what drugs did to us, right? Uh, but but I ask them simple questions like when you were 5 years old and you woke up, what did you see? What was in your room? Who was your heroes? All that kind of stuff. Try to put them at ease. But I know this, that to try and do it on your own is, the old saying, don't go wandering through your head by yourself. It's a bad neighborhood. You can't do it alone. You need somebody with an outside perspective that understands, that can rewrite your story the way it really was, not the way you perceived it.
So let's focus on your story. So you took us through a lot. So do you go by John or Mike or John Michael
I
or
go
what?
by Mike.
Okay. So you took us through a lot, Mike. Let's stay central to your story because sometimes I get in these podcasts and we get on a recording and
Yeah,
it gets a little parabolic and we're trying to you know teach lessons. But I think the best thing that we could ever do for anybody is just tell our truth. You're saying like, hey, somebody scripted something. They come into my office and it's scripted, but so sometimes I have to take this different approach or go this different avenue of try to get them off their script right away. But really, all you're doing is trying to get them to tell the truth.
right.
And the way that I've noticed, the best way to get someone comfortable into telling their truth is not to make them uncomfortable; it's to make them comfortable. And the way I choose to make people comfortable is here's my truth. I'm gonna take my masks off. I have a counseling degree as well. I don't want to see. I'm not, I don't want to be in a counseling code. I want you to like. Here's my truth. This is me, Brandon Human, you, Mike Human, with just nothing but our truths.
And that goes,
Right?
that goes back
Every,
to Bill and Dr. Bob. He said, I didn't come here to talk about you. I came to tell you my story.
yeah, and that's not necessarily. I'm not saying like I want to counsel somebody by just telling them just here, let me tell you my story, and hopefully it's going to encourage you to tell me yours. Um, but I'm also not going to try to manipulate the conversation. Like here, it's two human beings sitting here talking. What's your truth? My truth is I went through hell and I've came back out of it. And now that I've came back out of it, I realized yeah, I was in the bowels of hell. And that was through drug addiction, promiscuity, uh, different sorts of trauma. And the way that I coped was through drugs. And if you would like for me to tell you more, I could tell you more, but that's kind of how I would approach it. Um, eh, what are your truths? You talked about step 4 ran you away. What were you running from? What didn't you want to write on that step 4 that eventually you did write that did help you?
Well, for one thing, the first time I did step 4, I picked the wrong guy to do it with because I was staying it was like a Christian sober living home with 12-step focused. But me and my sponsor at the time, who was more like my father, his story was interesting, but I said, okay. So we went and I wrote down my 4th step, and
What'd you write? What did you write now?
I honestly don't remember. But I know this, that halfway through it, he goes, damn, Weber. And that's the wrong response.
Right.
So I put it
What
up.
what what do you remember when you finally started getting into step 4? Like for me, it was like adultery. It was I like you, I said I would never use heroin, and one time I allowed somebody to shoot me with fentanyl. I swear I was never going to use a needle. These were huge honesties in my step 4. In my fearless moral inventory. I did not want to admit to those things, right? I was responsible for ruining my marriage. I got to the point where my opiate withdrawal from the pain pills, the prescription, I was willing to tell people I was on pills, but I never wanted to admit I got shot up with fentanyl, that I overdosed, that I was making adult videos. Those were like, I'll take those to my grave. What were yours that you finally wrote in your step 4
Some of the
that
similar things is like interactions with my family, stealing pills from my mom because she died when she was 39. I was 18. She was my emotional pipeline, but I was getting her in trouble. I didn't, when you're stuck on you, you don't really pay attention to the fallout until later on. And she would be getting mother's little helpers back then. It was Valiums and Darvines and all that. And I'd be taking them. And then my dad would get mad at her. Her doctor would get mad at her for refilling scripts. And I think she knew. My dad was gone a lot, so I became kind of and I went through authentic manhood one time and realized that in some sense I was the husband of the house while my dad was gone, being the oldest brother. Should have been, but I was rotten at that. Just, there were some break ins I did. There was some using a needle was something that I wasn't proud of, but it started so early, it was pretty obvious. But the truth is
so
that I
the
was,
reason I asked that is because it, the you're in recovery step 4, those things are what's instrumental in being able to heal from, like
when I
you
finally
started
did
off the
the
conversation
12
with, was
steps, I used
that
the,
our secrets keep us sick. That was what you said. So that was why I was trying to get, like, for people who are going to watch this, um, I think the best way we could lead them into being honest is just by being honest, right?
well,
Instead of
yeah,
encouraging to be honest, just being honest.
the big book was confusing to me too on the 4 steps. So I used the NA workbook for the 4 step with the big book. Uh, and then when you think that you've expelled everything and there's still stuff that I only told my therapist, but I still got most of it out. And then to hear my sponsor come back at me with what he'd done, that was the relief. That took away the insanity plea. um,
And that's everything I'm saying, Mike, is when somebody else gets honest and they're like, you feel like I'm not alone. Holy cow. I kept those secrets because I felt alone. Shame and guilt lied to me and told me you're alone. You're the only one. That's where the healing comes in. Like, hold on, there's a whole world full of people with the same type, hurts and hangups and habits that I've had.
right.
A whole world full of them. I was high in my room in the dark under covers alone because I thought I was the only one. And when your sponsor shared that with you, you felt like, your word, relief.
Yeah, exactly. And that led me on to, I mean, I'm telling you, since, and I got to bring God into it. And I don't care what God you believe in. Personal belief is in Jesus, but I get confused when they say it's a narrow gate. I think because I believe it may be a narrow gate, but there's a lot of paths to get there. Whether you're believing Islam or Judaism, whatever it is, I don't believe. And the way I came to that is there is nothing in the world that my daughters could do where I would forsake them. Nothing. And I'm a self-centered, no good walking a dog, you know what. And if I'm capable of that unconditional love, why is God going to separate us? So That's what I struggled with. But my truth, when I got to and the reason I preach therapy is because that 3-year-old event, I would have never been able to open without help. And, um, and that was the thing that kept me in fight or flight for 42 years, I guess, or 40 years. But it also separated my family. It was me and mom against dad, and and all this kind of stuff. It just, but then, and it's funny because, and I think you'll find this too. People do well. We overachieve in some things. Like even though I was little, I was good at little league. I made straight A's because I was afraid to bring anything less home. I did. As long as I was on the field somewhere, I was okay. The minute I stepped off the field, that chaos would come back. I used to see my dad. I'd be playing little league. If I missed the ball or something like that, he'd be standing over in the fence line, shaking his head and spitting, chewing back. And I go, I've disappointed him. And later in life, my dad said he apologized, gave an amends to certain. I thought the best way to raise y'all or to get your respect was through fear. I didn't know what I was doing. And I thought that was hard for him to do, and I appreciate that. If I can't forgive him, then my kids can't forgive me. But and then I
Yeah.
almost immediately got into helping other people this time when I got sober. Well, service work is a big part of it, as you know, whether it's you go to an AA meeting and volunteer back then to empty the ashtrays or to co-chair a meeting or whatever you got to do. That's all service work, and it all takes you out of your head and gets you working some.
Yeah, I have a feeling that your AA experience is probably a lot different than mine. A lot of the old timers around here, I can just tell they had a much different experience than what I've had, so
Well,
it
and
seems
it's
like a
wherever.
lot more like a good old boy system way back in the day, like where you found your family. Like,
Yeah,
oh man, no, I've yet to really find that, and I've been in a lot of A rooms around here, and that's part of why God's got me on this journey of opening up, discussions
well,
via
that's
a podcast. Yeah,
and AA is different. Like I still consider my home group in Maryland because I spent. That's where I got. That's where I really grew up. I was born in Texas, but I've lived in Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Michigan, California. But for my recovery years, the beginning of them, I stayed in Maryland because I didn't trust myself to come back to Texas. Because every time I had, like I said, I had 5 1-year chips. I said, I want to go back and see my kids. They need me. They didn't need me. They were doing just fine. I needed to hear them. I was selfish. It's self-centered. I still did the same thing. In other words, for me, it took sacrifice to get to be the me that I really am. And today I'm happy with the guy I am. And so are my kids. I talk to them every day. They're in their 30s now. I got 6 grandchildren. Blessed beyond belief. But
amen.
had I not
So
taken that first step this time and been sick of everything and asked that question, why? Why on earth can some people stay sober and I can't? Why do I not like myself so bad that I'd rather be anybody but me? And I was good at putting on different hats.
well, Mike, as our time's coming to a close here, why don't you let us know, like, as someone who's been set free from addiction, what message of hope do you want to share with others who feel trapped or possibly hopeless right now? What would you want to say to them?
Well, for one thing, that if you're breathing, there's hope. uh, and because, and I think you said you OD'd. I was dead for 4 minutes, and it was 4 junkies that saved my life because they shot me up with cocaine. They didn't have Narcan back then. And so addicts are real people with real hearts, and they really care. If you go to a rehab, You get up the corporate ladder, the less you're going to pay attention to that. But the people that are on the ground, the techs, the counselors, they all care about you. They care about you because they want to give away what's given to them. And yes, they're getting paid for it because they have to. I mean, you got to pay rent and everything, and that's part of recovery too, is paying your bills and growing up, right? But I would say if you're struggling, reach out to Brandon, reach out to me, reach out to anybody, and just have a conversation and take the first step on the road to healing. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen. Living, breathing list of miracles that validates that.
Amen. Yeah. And then let them know if they want to reach out to you, let them know where they could do that at.
You can text me first at 832-360-5781, or you can email me at Weber, that's Weber, D like dog, F like Frank, C like Charlie at yahoo.com. Or you can find me on Facebook under Mike Weber.
And that's Weber DFC
Yeah,
at yahoo.com.
right. And Facebook, I don't know my link, but it's Mike Weber. And my whole story's on the internet somewhere. So,
Well, it's an incredible story, Mike, and I just applaud you for having the courage to be vulnerable about a lot of difficult things that, as I'm growing more and more in my recovery journey, I realize a lot more people have the same types of wounds that they want to heal from. And that's the beauty of our vulnerability and being honest.
so
So
I
I
got
want
one.
to thank you for that and just for your time.
If I can give you one more question or story, lived in Michigan, right? And so, as a Michigan fan, it was my 10th grade year. And we drove to Ohio State University one time and held up the newspaper saying Michigan beats Ohio State. It was fun. I just thought that was a funny memory that I hadn't thought of in a long time until you said you're from Ohio.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Well, don't forget to go and check out my book, Step 4: A Journey Through Addiction. It's out wherever you buy a book, and you can visit the website, www.recoverycouch.com. If you want to book any speaking engagements, and you can join us on the Recovery Couch Inner Circle on Patreon. If you want some behind the scenes bonus content, live Q&As, et cetera, et cetera. And I just want to remind everyone out there that you always have a seat right here on the Recovery Couch. Thanks again, Mike.
Thanks. I appreciate it.